Hi, everyone. This is Tim Fancher. I'm the owner and founder of Psalm 144 Church Security Seminars, and we're here in New Beginnings Church in downtown Tulsa. And I'm absolutely delighted that I'm here with the founder of New Beginnings and my partner in Psalm 144, Pastor KJ.
How you doing?
And we also are doubly blessed that we have a firearms expert with over 30 years experience in law enforcement, Brent Crittenden, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Crittenden. I was very close. But we just wanted to come together and talk a little bit. We've been working really hard to come together to teach churches, small to medium-sized churches, how to implement proper people and procedures to be able to get the church security team, a church protection team as we call them, up and running. And it's made up of volunteers. And what we really look to do is we look to get a team of dedicated people who are volunteers and to motivate and organize. So we're not able to come in and get every little square inch of things set up, but we can help pastors to come together, and that's what we've done with Pastor KJ. And we've been blessed with men like Brent that will come in and answer some of the hard questions about firearms, and that's really today's topic. So for other topics, you can see some of the other videos on our site at psalm144.org. But I really first just wanted just to turn over the floor to each of you for a moment. And when we're talking about bringing in church protection team, when you're talking about security and safety, and we're looking at what's happening in today's world and some of the stats that you both know and we've talked about.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts as a pastor in a church in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, on having firearms in church and having armed security?
Well, it's a great question. I think as the climate of our country is ever changing, I think that's going to become more of a reality of what pastors need to consider. I mean, I know here in the history of New Beginnings, it was October about 5 years ago when we had an armed individual that entered into the churches in our community. They had recently got out of jail, had an issue with a girlfriend that they were living with, was mad at the world, and systematically made their way down this street where there's 3 churches, and went into the first church and caused a ruckus, went into the second church and caused a ruckus. Fortunately was not able to get into our church. We did have door people at the door at the time who were able to alert the police and kind of locked us in. But that was 5 years ago. And but I look back at that scenario and I'm like, if that person had wanted to come in, we had no systems really in place to prevent them. We had no systems in place to respond if they had made it in. If they had forcibly tried to enter, we had nothing to take care of that. And so I just do believe that we are in a day and an age and a time where those considerations have to be made now, especially with the changing climate.
Absolutely. And that's something that, as you said, is changing. I mean, when you look at even 5 years ago, with the threats we're facing today, I've talked about, Scott, who's our partner at Psalm 144, and we've talked about it used to be that it was like, what's going to be like in a few years, and whenever we would speak, it was like, how horrible has it been since last week? I mean, it's a reality that we have to face, but we can't face it with fear.
Right.
And that's against Scripture. We need to face it in a pragmatic and practical way, and that's what men like you are helping all of us to do.
Absolutely.
So, Brent, well, what are your thoughts as a firearms expert on firearms in the church and some of the things that Pastor KJ just said?
Well, I have several thoughts and theories, and I discussed recently with a pastor about a society that he talked about what Paul wrote in Romans about a nation or society that ignores God is going to fail. And we see now church attendance is down, and we need to protect our flock.
That's
what
right.
we have to do. And that's going to involve a perimeter, building security as well as security inside. There's several different theories. Some is, do we want to post a armed guard at the door that's visible, which is a deterrent, but sometimes that the flock doesn't like that. They want a nice, loving environment, which we all do, but we've got to realize that the only thing that stops violence is violence. That we have to use violence to do that. So there's several different ideas and ways and things we can do to where we can meet in the middle.
Right, and I think that's what's so important. It's something that ranging from seminary to whenever I teach street self-defense all the way to church securities, we talk so much about balance. And I think that's one thing that some pastors with good intentions missed out on is that they would either completely ignore it and they would try to pretend like there's nothing there, or they would go overboard and they would spread fear and discord. Right. And like you said, it's a matter of having some of those key terms like command presence, of really making it look like if the church is being scouted, and that does happen, where someone is scouting out a church, and they look, and I like to just use the term of taking care of business. So this is a church who, if they're taking care of the little things, they're taking care of the big things. And so, there's some different things that we've talked about, but as you said, of bringing that balance, but also the time for political correctness, the time for worrying about whether or not we're going to hurt someone's feelings, all that, has to be out the window when you're talking about keeping children safe. Absolutely. And so if it upsets someone or offends someone that we're saying we will meet violence with violence, I'm sorry, but in my point of view, and so the point of view of Psalm 144, that's just too bad. But because it's not an emotional response, what it is that we're taking the approach of, with proper tactics, with proper training, that we will implement whatever measures are necessary, but we're doing it in not only just a practical and a trained and educated way, but even in a scriptural way. And that's why it's called Psalm 144, blessed be the Lord my rock, who prepares my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And that's what I really like people to understand, is that the church flow, we're setting out to have minimal disruption, and that's something I want you to speak on in a moment. Absolutely. But at the same time, make it where this is a church where people are going to show up and they're going to be safe. And so the question is then, how are we going to be able to do that? And I think it's just like this. It's by having men of your caliber coming together, having those tabletop conversations, and then implementing the proper people and procedures. But what are your thoughts on concerns about that affecting church flow? In other words, this is how we did church before Psalm 144 came in, and now we're going to have it, let's say, even one armed officer that's a volunteer person that's got their proper permits and training, of course. But what are your thoughts on a pastor about that? What are some things that you would tell another pastor to be mindful of?
Oh, absolutely. Well, looking at this whole topic, we have faced this over the last probably more over the last 5 years, as our church is intentionally multi-ethnic, and so we're drawing people from North Tulsa, South Tulsa, East and West, so they're coming in from all directions. And one of the things that was brought to our attention, and just especially in the last 2 years, one of the concerns that folks had that were coming from South Tulsa, because this being on the edge and the cusp of North Tulsa, there's a lot of preconceived notions. There's misperceptions and things of that nature. And then when you're intentionally blending and bringing people together, there's a lot of apprehension, and the people are concerned about safety. And when they come together in the body of Christ, they want to feel like they're safe. They want to feel like their children are safe. They want to feel like their babies are safe. And so one of the complaints that we began to hear of even last year was just that even in our church, the positioning of our nursery. Our nursery is in the front open breezeway of the church. So when you first come into the doors, the first two rooms that are in the center of our building are the nursery. Well, families that came enjoyed service. They enjoyed everything about the church, but they weren't comfortable with that because of the part of town that we were in. And we had no answer for that. We had no answer. At first, you go through the whole, well, we go here and it's totally fine. It's not a big deal. But then when you're trying to put yourself in the mindset of sheep who are coming and they want to rest and they want to be at peace and they want to, lie down by the still waters, we have to put systems and protocols and things in place that provide that atmosphere. And so since implementing even some of the preliminary steps that we have, having that command presence, having people positioned in the different zones from outside to the inside zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, having that in place, it gives an overall sense of peace. And I think when people walk in and they see that, they may not fully understand what's happening in the church, but they know that something is happening. Right. And when they understand that something is happening, I think that breeds just an atmosphere of peace of that, okay, if something were to go down, then at least there's something in place that will respond. And so from a pastoral perspective, I think that pastors have to become more mindful of that for their flock, because people are thinking about that now. Whereas if you go back 20 years, I don't think people were thinking about someone walking into a church and shooting up a church. But today, we are 1 second tick away, one Sunday morning service away from that being a reality in the world that we live in and the climate that we live in today. Because people are, there's unfortunately people out there that are trying to make statements and they're trying to get recognition. They're trying to make themselves known to promote their agenda. And I think it would be foolish of the church to not think that we would be a prime target for that.
Absolutely. Well said. And Brent, one thing I was thinking about with you is 30 plus years law enforcement experience. You've trained from civilians to federal agents in firearms. You've been a Christian for a very long time. You're an ordained minister. So you've been around. And one thing I'm curious about are some of the changes that you've seen in the perception versus the reality of the nature of violence in church, and how you, as an expert with the background you have, what you're doing to pacify those fears and how you're helping to train people, and then how you're going to be able to help bring that into 144 as we train churches locally, regionally, and even nationally someday. So what are your thoughts on some of these topics about some of the changes within churches, perception versus reality?
Well, we've got to bring the word out and teach our members, especially our older members, that this is not the same world. It's
right.
a different world that we live in. And I don't like it. I don't like violence. I hate violence. We want to prevent violence. But like you said, there's that mentality out there. Somebody wants to make a name for themselves.
Someone wants to make a name for themselves.
And get famous. You know, they're going to come into a church. And I use the word sheepdog.
Right.
You know, the sheepdog is not violent, does not want to be violent until that wolf comes around to the flock.
Sure.
Then that sheepdog will do his job.
Right.
You know, and that's what we got to look at, and that's where we got to be. And we still have part of a congregation that thinks that it's never going to happen to us. Chances are it's not. Your chances are very good it never will. But it could. And we have to face that reality, and we have to overcome that it'll never happen to me syndrome and face it. And that involves training. That involves placing somebody in the church at strategic locations, communication between these guys. It involves a lot of training where we have to be inside this close-quartered environment, that we have to do what's called surgical shooting. It has to be precise. There's no room for error. We have to train and maintain those standards and have somebody, a team in the church that's going to maintain those standards and protect our flock.
Well, in our final moments here, and what we'll be doing is taking a break and then kind of shifting gears. But in our final moments here, one thing I'd like to know is what we do with 144, and Pastor KJ can attest to this, is that we really set it up where after 2 Sundays we can at least get a team in place, and then after that we continue with their support, and that's people, process, procedures of setting everything where it needs to be, and then the follow-up support. So on the firearm side of it, if someone then contacts you and says, yes, I've been with Tim Fancher and Pastor KJ at Psalm 144, we're interested in that, and their team wants to get with you, what can they expect for a timeline of how long it's going to take you to be able to get them where they're going to be at that level for, like you said, the surgical shooting, and also just being very mindful and, of course, very safe? Now, what are some realistic expectations for them training-wise?
Typically, what I provide to civilians is a 8-hour, 1-day class where I go out and I build the foundation. I give them the basic shooting fundamentals that they can build on their own. Because I don't have to physically be there for a person to get better as they build and practice and train. I can show them what it takes to do that, and from then on, what it takes is practice and going out to the range and challenging themselves, becoming accurate, and with accuracy comes speed. So within a day, I can get a person that has no experience, which a lot of times I'd rather have someone with no experience out there, and I could train that person to show them the basic building blocks, the fundamentals of shooting, and let them go on their own and find a place to shoot and become good and confident. They have to become confident in themselves, and they have to reach down inside and they have to know that if that time ever comes, that they're going to be able to pull the trigger. I mean, I've trained police officers that I've even put into scenarios and situations that could not pull the trigger. They could not do it, and it takes a person that knows that they're going to be able to do it, that they have to understand the thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, and so to go ahead and end this then, Pastor KJ, it seems like I've known you my whole life in some ways, but realistically, it was just 2-3 months ago.
Right.
So since that time, if you look back at Pastor KJ New Beginnings in, say, June, and you have insecurity concerns, and you told me something I'll never forget, that you said you'd been praying for 6 months for the Lord to send a church security expert your way. I'll never forget when you told me that. And when we first met, it wasn't even on that topic.
Right.
It was for something else. But now you're hearing that with Psalm 144, 2 Sunday sessions where I come out to the church, and it's going to be up and running. And then even from there, they follow up with 1 8-hour session with our expert Brent here, and they can be in place. As a pastor, how does that make it? What are your thoughts on the pastor of today versus the pastor of June? Did you think that was something that could be done in that short period of time and with such a minimal investment, really?
Absolutely not. I didn't think, I think that the unknown of just church protection in general, it seems like this huge monster, because every shepherd's heart is to protect their sheep. Okay. And so you try and think of all the different ways that you can do that, and sometimes you just bypass the simple things. And I think that was the greatest, one of the greatest things that you've shown us, is that there are a lot of simple things that can be done that don't require a lot of time, nor require a huge amount of investment, that any size church with any pastor who is concerned about protecting their sheep can do. And so with us, even being a few months in, we haven't had to make, the huge investment. We've bought meals for those who were going through the training and, and things of that nature. And, there's uniforms and stuff like that, but that's all nominal. Right. Because when you look at the cost of a life, the cost of making sure that everybody in your congregation is safe is priceless. Right. And so, the last thing any pastor ever wants to feel is that someone came to their service on any day and lost their life unless they were getting saved. Right. That's the only loss of life that is acceptable to us. And so I would say to any pastor out there that this is something that you can do soon, you can do immediately, that you can do without many hurdles or many obstacles. And I think it's the responsibility that every pastor has for their flock that they're trying to lead.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you, and I'd like to thank any of you that's been watching this video. I'm Tim Fancher of Psalm 144. This is Pastor KJ of New Beginnings Church. This is our firearms expert, Brent. And if you want to learn more about anyone that's on our team, we have a remarkable group of men and a woman who have come together. Just go to our bio page. You can learn more about us, and for more information, send a message. Please make sure to check back, because we're going to continue this conversation with a part 2 where we're going to be talking about church flow and things that pastors should know. So again, this is Tim, Pastor KJ, and Brent with Psalm 144 Church Protection Services. Thank you all so much, and God bless.